Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name's Jake Morrison. 43 years old, been pushing 18-wheelers down America's highways for the better part of 2 decades. I've seen weird stuff out there. Dead deer that stand back up, fog that moves against the wind, hitchhikers that vanish when you look twice. But what happened to me on I-75 south of Macon wasn't weird. It was calculated, deliberate, and it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. I was running solo from Atlanta down to Tampa. Standard freight haul, car parts for a dealership. Nothing special about the cargo, nothing special about the route. I'd made that run probably 50 times over the years. Know every truck stop, every way station, every decent coffee between Georgia and Florida. It was a Tuesday night in November, around 11:45 p.m. when I saw the sign. Rest area, 2 miles, fuel, food, lodging. The kind of blue highway sign you see everywhere. But something about it nagged at me. I'd never noticed it before, and like I said, I knew that stretch of road. I wasn't particularly tired, but I'd been driving since morning and figured a quick break wouldn't hurt. Stretch the legs, grab some coffee, check the load, routine stuff. I took the exit and followed a narrow access road that curved back into the trees. The pavement was older here, cracked, with weeds growing through the gaps. The rest area was bigger than I expected. Maybe 20 parking spots arranged in a half circle around a central building. Old brick construction, probably built in the 70s. A few scattered picnic tables, some broken playground equipment, the usual setup. But what caught my attention were the trucks. 7 of them, all different makes and models. A red Peterbilt, a blue Kenworth, an older Freightliner with rust streaks down the sides. They were parked at odd angles, not the neat rows you usually see at truck stops. More like they'd been abandoned in a hurry. I pulled into an empty spot near the building and killed the engine. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. No generators running, no CB chatter, no sound of diesel engines idling. Nothing. Even the insects had gone silent. I climbed down from the cab and walked toward the building. The windows were dark, but I could see a faint glow coming from somewhere inside. As I got closer, I realized the other trucks weren't empty. There were shapes in some of the cabs, drivers asleep in their seats, heads tilted back, mouths slightly open. The front door of the building was propped open with a wooden wedge. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered over rows of vending machines and a few scattered tables. The place smelled like stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. Behind a counter at the far end, a man in a uniform shirt was reading a newspaper. He looked up when I entered. Mid-50s, gray hair, the kind of face that had seen a lot of miles. His name tag read Curtis. "Evening," he said, folding the paper. "Little late to be on the road." "Just passing through," I replied, walking to the coffee machine. It was one of those ancient models that dispenses liquid that barely qualifies as coffee, but it was hot and caffeinated. "Long haul?" Curtis asked. "Atlanta to Tampa, you?" He smiled, but there was something off about it. Too wide, held too long. "I work here, been working here for, well, quite a while now." I fed quarters into the machine and watched brown liquid fill the paper cup. Behind me, I heard Curtis moving around. But when I turned, he was still behind the counter, hands folded, watching me. "Quiet night?" I said. They usually are. He paused, then leaned forward slightly. You know, we don't get many drivers through here who aren't regulars. Regulars? Curtis gestured toward the parking lot. Those boys out there. They've been coming through for years. Same routes, same schedules. Reliable. Something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. I glanced out the window at the trucks, then back at Curtis. They sleeping? Resting, he corrected. It's important to rest when you're on the road. Dangerous to push too hard. I took a sip of the coffee. It tasted like it had been sitting for hours. Well, I should probably get going. Should you? The question hung in the air between us. Curtis was still smiling, but his eyes had gone cold, flat, like a shark's eyes. Yeah, I said, setting down the cup. Thanks for the coffee. As I turned to leave, Curtis called out, Jake. I froze. I hadn't told him my name. Slowly, I turned around. Curtis was no longer behind the counter. He was standing in the middle of the room, blocking the path to the door. In his hand was a small black device. Looked like a garage door opener. You're tired, he said. I can see it. The way you're holding your shoulders, the slight tremor in your hands. You've been pushing too hard. It's dangerous. I'm fine. Are you? He clicked the device once. Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who needs to rest. The lights went out. In the darkness, I could hear Curtis moving, his footsteps slow and deliberate. I felt along the wall for the door, but my hands found only smooth brick. The exit had to be there. I'd come through it just minutes ago. The thing about long-haul drivers, Curtis's voice came from somewhere to my left, is that you're always alone, always isolated. If something happens to you out here, it might be days before anyone notices you're missing. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, temporarily blinding me. When my eyes adjusted, Curtis was standing directly in front of me, close enough that I could smell his breath. Metallic, like old pennies. How many drivers do you think disappear every year? He asked conversationally. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The statistics don't tell the whole story because a lot of them are independents. No families, no real ties, they just vanish. I tried to push past him, but he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. The flashlight illuminated his face, and I saw that his smile had become something inhuman. Too many teeth, all of them too sharp. There's a market for that, he continued. Organs, identity documents, clean rigs with no questions asked. Amazing what people will pay for a truck with a legitimate DOT number and no recent inspections. Behind us, I heard the sound of engines starting. The trucks in the parking lot were coming to life, but not with the rumble of diesel engines. These sounded wrong, too smooth, too quiet. Curtis released my arm and stepped back. Here's what's going to happen, Jake. You're going to walk outside, get in your truck, and drive to the way station 10 miles south of here. You'll park in the back lot and wait. My associates will take care of the rest. And if I don't? He clicked the device again, and I heard the unmistakable sound of my truck's engine dying. Then you'll join the other drivers who thought they had a choice. The lights flickered back on, revealing that we were no longer in the same room. The vending machines were gone, replaced by metal tables covered with plastic sheeting. The walls were lined with shelves holding jars filled with things I didn't want to identify. But the worst part was the smell. Under the disinfectant, I could now detect something else. Something organic and wrong. You see, Curtis said, walking to one of the tables, the beauty of this location is that it's not on any official maps. The state built this rest area in 1973, then abandoned it in 1981 due to budget cuts. But the exit signs are still up. The access road is still maintained, and drivers still stop here when they need to rest. He pulled back one of the plastic sheets, revealing what looked like car parts, but not the kind I was hauling. These were organic, human parts, arranged with surgical precision. The organs go to private medical facilities, no questions asked, premium prices. The trucks and cargo get new paperwork, new VIN numbers, new owners, and the drivers. He shrugged. Well, there's always demand for fresh meat in certain circles. I backed toward the door, but Curtis held up the device again. I wouldn't recommend running, Jake. Those trucks outside, they're operated by remote control now. The drivers inside have been modified. They don't need food or rest anymore. They just drive predetermined routes, picking up cargo and delivering it to specified locations. Through the window, I could see the shapes in the truck cabs more clearly now. They weren't sleeping. Their eyes were open, staring straight ahead, but there was nothing behind them. Empty sockets filled with electronic components. The process is quite humane, Curtis continued. A quick injection to paralyze the nervous system, then surgical removal of the brainstem. We replace it with a simple computer interface. The body continues to function, but the mind is gone. Very efficient. One of the trucks had started moving, backing out of its parking spot with mechanical precision. As it turned, I could see the driver's face clearly. It had been a woman once, maybe 30 years old. Now her skin was gray and waxy, her jaw hanging slack. Wires ran from ports drilled into her skull down to a control box mounted on the dashboard. We call them our regulars, Curtis said proudly. They never get tired, never make mistakes, never ask questions. Perfect employees. I felt for the door handle behind me, but my fingers found only smooth metal. Curtis noticed and chuckled. The exit is still there, Jake. You just have to earn it. He walked to a cabinet and withdrew a syringe filled with clear liquid. This won't hurt for very long. The paralytic takes effect in about 30 seconds. After that, you won't feel anything at all. That's when I noticed something Curtis had missed. The coffee machine was still plugged in, and its power cord ran along the wall to an outlet near the door. I grabbed the cord and yanked it from the wall, plunging that section of the room into relative darkness. Curtis cursed and swung the flashlight toward me, but I was already moving. I threw my shoulder against what I hoped was the door and felt it give way. Cold night air hit my face as I stumbled into the parking lot. My truck was where I'd left it, but the engine was dead. I tried the ignition anyway. Nothing. Around me, the other trucks were moving in a coordinated pattern, forming a circle around my rig. I popped the hood and saw immediately what Curtis had done. A small device was attached to the battery terminal, some kind of remote kill switch. I ripped it off and threw it as far as I could. The engine turned over on the second try. As I threw the truck into gear, Curtis appeared in the doorway of the building. He was no longer pretending to be human. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his movements were too fluid, like he was floating rather than walking. The other trucks were trying to box me in, but their movements were too predictable. I gunned the engine and drove straight at a gap between the Peterbilt and the Kenworth. The automated drivers didn't react fast enough to close the gap. I made it to the access road doing 40 miles per hour, way too fast for safety, but I could see headlights following me. The other trucks had turned around and were giving chase. The access road seemed longer than it had when I'd entered. I drove for what felt like 10 minutes before I saw the interstate ahead. Behind me, the headlights were getting closer. I merged onto I-75 without stopping, pushing my speed up to 75, then 80. The other trucks were still behind me, running in perfect formation about a quarter-mile back. For the next 50 miles, they followed me, never getting closer, never falling behind, just maintaining that exact distance. I tried radioing for help, but every channel was filled with static. My CB, my phone, even the truck's GPS system, all dead. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it ended. I looked in my mirrors, and the road behind me was empty. Just normal interstate traffic and the occasional set of headlights. I didn't stop until I reached a busy truck stop near the Florida border. Even then, I sat in my cab for 20 minutes, engine running, doors locked, watching for any sign that I'd been followed. The delivery in Tampa went normally. Routine paperwork, routine unloading, routine small talk with the warehouse guys. But when I called dispatch to report the completion, they told me something that made my blood run cold. According to their records, I'd made the delivery 2 days earlier. The computer showed that I'd checked in, unloaded, and signed off on the job 48 hours ago. I checked my logbook. The last entry I'd made was for the rest stop on Interstate 75. After that, nothing. 2 days of missing time. I drove straight home to Atlanta and took a week off. Told my dispatcher I had the flu. During that week, I did some research on the rest area I'd stopped at. What I found didn't make me feel better. According to state records, the rest area had been decommissioned in 1981, just like Curtis had said. But what he hadn't mentioned was why it had been shut down. Over a 3-year period in the late 70s, 17 long-haul drivers had disappeared on that stretch of E75. All of them were solo operators. All of them were found later at various locations, but not intact. The investigation had been handled jointly by the FBI and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Their report, which I obtained through a Freedom of Information request, made for disturbing reading. The drivers hadn't just been murdered, they'd been systematically dismantled. Organs harvested with surgical precision, bodies drained of blood, brains removed and preserved in chemicals. The case had gone cold in 1982, but the disappearances had continued sporadically over the decades. Always the same pattern. Solo drivers, long-haul routes, bodies found weeks later in various stages of disassembly. I returned to driving after my week off, but I've never taken that route again. I go around through Alabama now, even though it adds 6 hours to the trip. When other drivers ask why I avoid I-75 south of Macon, I tell them there's too much traffic. It's easier than explaining the truth. Because the truth is, I think Curtis and his operation are still out there. Still luring tired drivers off the interstate with promises of rest and coffee. Still converting them into remote-controlled vehicles for their cargo-running operation. And the worst part? I think it's bigger than just one rest area. Last month, I was talking to another driver at a truck stop in Mississippi. He mentioned a strange encounter he'd had on Interstate 20 near Jackson. A rest area that wasn't on any maps, staffed by a man who knew his name before he'd introduced himself. When I described Curtis to him, his face went pale. "That's him," he said. "That's the guy, but how is that possible? That was 3 years ago, and he looked exactly the same." I didn't have an answer for him, still don't. All I know is that somewhere out there, on highways across the country, there are rest areas that shouldn't exist, staffed by people who shouldn't be alive, collecting drivers who will never see home again. And if you're ever driving late at night and you see a sign for a rest area you don't recognize, my advice is simple. Keep driving. No matter how tired you are, no matter how much you need coffee or a break, just keep driving. Because once you pull into Curtis's rest stop, the only way you leave is as cargo. The thing about driving long haul is that you start to know the rhythms of the road. You learn which truck stops have clean showers, which way stations are strictly by the book, and which stretches of highway feel wrong even when you can't explain why. But you also learn to recognize patterns. The same drivers on the same routes moving the same cargo at the same times. So, when I started seeing trucks that didn't fit the pattern, I should have paid more attention. My name's Dale Hutchins, and I've been running freight between Texas and California for the better part of 15 years. Mostly electronics, sometimes automotive parts, occasionally something that the manifest just lists as miscellaneous cargo, do not inspect. I don't ask questions about the last category. In this business, curiosity can get you blacklisted faster than a failed drug test. This story starts on a humid Tuesday morning in El Paso. I just picked up a load bound for Los Angeles. 23 pallets of computer components that needed to be there by Thursday. Standard run, good money, no complications. Or so I thought. The first unusual thing happened about 50 miles west of Albuquerque. I was cruising along at a steady 65 when I noticed a convoy in my mirrors. 4 trucks running in tight formation about a quarter-mile back. Nothing strange about that. Drivers often convoy up for safety or company on long hauls, but these trucks were identical. Same make, same model, same paint scheme. White Freightliner Cascadius with red stripes down the sides and no company logos. They maintained perfect spacing, never varying their distance from each other or from my rig. I tried raising them on the CB. Breaker 19, this is southbound Sam looking for the white convoy about a quarter-mile back. Y'all got your ears on? Static. I switched channels and tried again. Nothing but dead air. For the next 100 miles, they stayed exactly where they were. Never passed, never fell back, never broke formation. It was like they were tethered together by invisible cables. I stopped for fuel at a Flying J near Flagstaff. The convoy pulled in behind me, the 4 trucks positioning themselves at pumps along the back row. I watched them in my side mirror as I filled my tanks, waiting to see the drivers get out. They didn't. The trucks sat there, engines idling. But no one emerged from the cabs. No movement, no activity, nothing. After 10 minutes, I walked over to get a closer look. The first truck was closest to the building. Through the windshield, I could see a figure in the driver's seat. Male, wearing a baseball cap, hands on the steering wheel. But something about his posture was wrong. Too rigid, too still. I tapped on the door. No response. I knocked harder, loud enough that anyone inside would have heard it. The figure didn't move. Walking around to the passenger side, I cupped my hands against the window and peered. Inside. That's when I saw the wires. Thin cables running from the dashboard up to the driver's neck, disappearing under the collar of his shirt. I backed away quickly and headed for the truck stop office. The clerk behind the counter was a heavy-set woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dolores. "There's something weird about those trucks out there," I told her, pointing toward the convoy. She glanced out the window, then back at me. "What trucks?" I turned to look. The convoy was gone. All 4 trucks had vanished without a sound, leaving only empty spaces at the fuel pumps. They were just there, I insisted. 4 white Freightliners running in formation. Dolores shrugged. "Lot of trucks come through here, hun. They don't usually stick around long." I paid for my fuel and walked back to my rig, scanning the parking lot for any sign of the convoy. Nothing. It was like they'd never existed. But as I pulled back onto the interstate, there they were again. Same position, same spacing, same perfect formation. Following me west toward California. The CB crackled to life as I merged into traffic. But instead of the usual trucker chatter, I heard something that made my skin crawl. It was a voice, mechanical and flat, reciting coordinates. 35.246 north, 111.978 west. Cargo secure. Proceeding to waypoint Delta. I grabbed my mic. "Say again? Who's this?" The voice continued as if I hadn't spoken. Fuel level nominal. All systems operational. Estimated arrival time 0200 hours. Then silence. I tried several more times to raise whoever was broadcasting, but got no response. The voice would return every hour or so, always reciting the same type of information. Coordinates, fuel levels, system status reports, like a computer giving automated updates. As the sun set behind me, I started to notice other details about the convoy. Their headlights never dimmed, never switched to high beams, never varied in intensity. They maintained the exact same speed regardless of terrain or traffic conditions. And most disturbing of all, I never saw them signal when changing lanes. They just moved in perfect synchronization, as if controlled by a single mind. Around midnight, I decided to test something. I took the next exit, a small off-ramp leading to a truck stop called Desert Dan's. The convoy followed, maintaining their formation even as we navigated the curves of the access road. Desert Dan's was one of those old-school truck stops, a few fuel pumps, a small diner, and a gravel lot that had seen better decades. I parked near the diner and waited to see what the convoy would do. They pulled into the lot and arranged themselves in a perfect square formation, engines still running. Through the diner's window I could see other customers, a few local drivers, a couple of long haulers catching a late dinner. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that something very abnormal was happening in their parking lot. I walked into the diner and took a seat at the counter. The waitress, a thin woman with graying hair, poured me coffee without being asked. "You with that convoy out there?" she asked. "You've seen them before?" She nodded toward the window. "They come through every few weeks. Always the same trucks, always the same formation. Drivers never come inside, never buy fuel. They just sit out there for about an hour, then leave." "How long has this been going on?" "Oh, maybe 2 years now. Started right after that big rig accident out on the interstate." I leaned forward, interested. "What accident?" The waitress glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Happened about 5 miles west of here. 4 trucks were running convoy when a dust storm hit. 0 visibility, total whiteout conditions. They went off the road at full speed, rolled down into the arroyo." She paused to refill my cup. "All 4 drivers were killed instantly. Took 3 days to recover the bodies, and another week to haul the trucks out of the gulch. But here's the weird part. The cargo was never found." "What kind of cargo?" "That's what nobody could figure out. The manifests listed the trucks as empty, just deadheading back to their home base. But the accident investigators said the way the trucks rolled, the impact patterns, it was like they were carrying full loads." I sipped my coffee, thinking. "And you think the convoy I'm seeing is connected to that accident?" The waitress shrugged. "All I know is that the trucks that come through here now have the same paint scheme as the ones that crashed. Same company logos, same everything." "What company?" "That's the other weird thing. When investigators tried to trace the trucks, they couldn't find any record of the company. The DOT numbers were fake, the insurance policies were expired, and the registration papers were forgeries." She leaned closer. "My husband works for the county sheriff's department. He was on the recovery team that pulled those trucks out of the arroyo. He said the drivers' bodies were strange, like they'd been dead for a lot longer than 3 days. Decomposed, but not from the accident. From something else." Through the window, I could see the convoy trucks were still arranged in their square formation. But now there were lights moving around them. Not headlights or hazard flashers, but small points of light that seemed to float independently through the air. "What are those lights?" I asked. The waitress looked out the window and immediately stepped back from the counter. "That's new," she whispered. They've never done that before. The lights were getting brighter, and as they moved closer to the diner, I could see they weren't artificial illumination. They were some kind of organic phosphorescence, like the glow you see in deep ocean creatures. And they were attached to something. Figures were walking between the trucks, tall, thin shapes that moved with unnatural fluidity. As they got closer to the diner windows, I could see they wore the same type of baseball caps and work shirts as typical long-haul drivers. But their skin had a grayish, waxy appearance, and their eyes reflected the light like mirrors. Jesus Christ, the waitress breathed. Those are the drivers. One of the figures stopped directly in front of the window and stared at us. Its face was human, but wrong. Features too sharp, skin too tight, mouth slightly open to reveal teeth that were all canines. It raised one hand and pointed directly at me. The lights in the diner flickered and went out. In the darkness, I could hear the other customers talking in confused, frightened voices. The waitress grabbed my arm. "They want you," she whispered. "They want you to join them." When the lights came back on, the convoy was gone. The parking lot was empty except for a few normal trucks belonging to the other customers. But on the window where the figure had pointed, there was a handprint burned into the glass. Not from heat, but from cold. The print was outlined in frost, despite the desert heat outside. I paid for my coffee and walked quickly back to my truck. As I climbed into the cab, the CB crackled to life again. "Cargo acquisition failed," the mechanical voice announced. "Returning to base. Next attempt scheduled for 0300 hours." I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, tires squealing on the gravel. On the interstate, I pushed my speed up to 75, then 80, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever I'd encountered at Desert Dan's. But as I crested a hill about 10 miles west, there they were again. The convoy had somehow gotten ahead of me and was now running formation on the road below. As I approached, they adjusted their positions to box me in. The truck on my left moved closer, and I could see the driver clearly through his window. It was definitely human, but the skin was too pale and the movements too jerky, like a marionette being controlled by an inexperienced puppeteer. Wires ran from the dashboard up to ports drilled into his skull. The CB voice returned, but this time it was different. More human, but hollow and echo-filled. "Dale Hutchins," it said. "Dot number 77-3984. Current cargo, computer components. Destination, Los Angeles." I grabbed my mic with shaking hands. "Who is this? How do you know my information?" "We know all information. We process all data. We are the network." "What do you want?" "Integration. Your truck has been selected for convoy inclusion. Please reduce speed and prepare for boarding." Like hell I would. I floored the accelerator and pulled into the left lane, trying to pass the lead truck. But as soon as I moved, all 4 convoy trucks accelerated to match my speed. No matter how fast I went, they stayed perfectly aligned with my rig. The CB crackled again. "Resistance is inefficient. Integration is inevitable." That's when I noticed the lights ahead. Red and blue flashers. A state police roadblock was set up across all lanes of the interstate, forcing traffic to a complete stop. I had no choice but to slow down and join the line of vehicles waiting to pass through the checkpoint. Behind me, the convoy trucks arranged themselves in a neat row, engines idling patiently. A state trooper approached my window. Young guy, probably mid-20s, with the kind of serious expression that comes from seeing too much weird stuff on the night shift. "License and logbook, please," he said. I handed over my documents. "Officer, I need to report something strange. Those trucks behind me, they've been following me for the past 8 hours and I think their drivers are dead." The trooper looked back at the convoy, then at me. "Sir, there are no trucks behind you." I turned around. The road behind my rig was empty, except for normal traffic passing through the checkpoint. "They were just there," I insisted. 4 white Freightliners running in formation. The trooper handed back my documents. "Sir, you look exhausted. When's the last time you slept?" I couldn't remember. The whole day had become a blur of highway miles and impossible encounters. "There's a rest area about 20 miles ahead," the trooper continued. "I recommend you pull over and get some sleep before continuing." I nodded and drove through the checkpoint, but I had no intention of stopping at any rest area. I wanted to put as many miles as possible between myself and whatever those convoy trucks really were. But 20 miles later, I started seeing things that weren't there. Shadows moving across the road, phantom headlights in my mirrors, shapes standing on the shoulder that vanished when I looked directly at them. The trooper had been right. I was dangerously tired. The rest area sign appeared in my headlights like a mirage. Clean restrooms, picnic tables, security lighting. Everything a tired driver needed. I pulled in and parked in a space near the building. The lot was nearly empty, just my truck and a couple of cars. I locked the doors, climbed into the sleeper, and was unconscious within minutes. I woke up to the sound of engines, lots of them. Through the windshield, I could see the parking lot was now full of trucks. Dozens of them, all identical white Freightliners with red stripes. They were arranged in perfect rows, like a military formation. And standing between the trucks were the drivers. All of them looked human from a distance, but as my eyes adjusted to the pre-dawn light, I could see the wires running from their skulls to control boxes mounted on their belts. One of them noticed I was awake and began walking toward my truck. As it got closer, I could see its face clearly. It had once been a man, probably in his 40s, with sandy hair and a mustache. But the skin was grayish and waxy, and the eyes were completely black. It stopped next to my door and spoke, but its mouth didn't move. The voice came from the control box on its belt. "Integration time," it announced. "Please exit the vehicle." More figures were converging on my truck now, moving with that same jerky, mechanical gait. I started the engine and threw it into reverse, but there were trucks behind me now, boxing me in. I grabbed the CB mic. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Dale Hutchins on Interstate 40 eastbound. I'm being held against my will at a rest area. Send help." The response came immediately, but it wasn't from any human dispatcher. "Help is not required," the mechanical voice said. "You will be integrated into the network. Your truck will serve a higher purpose." "What network? What are you talking about?" "We are the Phantom Fleet. We carry cargo that must not be discovered by human authorities. We deliver goods that do not officially exist. We are the hidden economy of America." One of the figures had climbed onto my running board and was trying to force open the door. Through the glass, I could see surgical scars running along its neck where the control wires had been implanted. "What cargo?" I shouted into the mic. "Organs, weapons, drugs, human beings. Whatever pays the highest profit margin. We are the ultimate freight service. No questions asked, no records kept, no witnesses left alive." More figures were climbing onto my truck now, rocking it back and forth as they tried to break in. I could hear metal tools scraping against the windows and the sound of the door locks straining. That's when I remembered something. In my toolbox behind the seat was a flare gun I'd bought years ago for emergency signaling. I'd never used it, but flares burn hot and bright, hot enough to melt metal, bright enough to be seen for miles. I found the gun and loaded a flare cartridge with shaking hands. The figures outside were making progress on the door locks. Any second now, they'd break through. I aimed the flare gun at the ceiling of the cab and pulled the trigger. The phosphorus flare ignited with a brilliant white light that lit up the entire parking lot. The figures outside immediately backed away, covering their faces with mechanical movements. The flare burned through the roof of my cab and shot into the sky, where it exploded in a shower of sparks. For a moment, the entire rest area was bathed in daylight-bright illumination. And in that light, I could see the truth about the Phantom Fleet. The trucks weren't real, they were projections, holographic images cast by devices hidden around the parking lot. The drivers were real enough, or had been once, but they were remote-controlled puppets, kept animated by the electronic systems grafted into their nervous systems. As the flare burned out and darkness returned, the illusion began to collapse. The phantom trucks flickered and vanished like static on a TV screen. The puppet drivers stumbled and fell as their control systems overloaded from the electromagnetic pulse generated by the flare. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I gunned the engine and drove straight through the space where the phantom trucks had been, heading for the interstate at dangerous speed. In my mirrors, I could see the rest area returning to normal. Just an empty parking lot, a small building and a few scattered cars. No sign of the massive convoy that had been there moments before. I drove straight through to Los Angeles without stopping, making the delivery with hours to spare. But when I tried to tell my dispatcher what had happened, he just laughed it off as road fatigue and hallucinations. It wasn't until weeks later that I learned the truth about the Phantom Fleet. Another driver I knew, a guy named Roy, who ran the same routes I did, mentioned seeing identical white trucks running perfect formations at night. They're connected to those organ trafficking rings, he told me over coffee at a truck stop in Barstow. FBI's been tracking them for years, but they can never find the trucks during daylight hours. It's like they just disappear. Disappear where? Roy shrugged. Nobody knows. Some say they've got underground facilities where they hide during the day. Others think they're using some kind of military stealth technology. All I know is that drivers who get too curious about them tend to disappear too. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. Word is they're recruiting, looking for drivers who won't ask questions about the cargo, offering big money, full benefits, complete medical coverage. The only catch is, once you sign on, you can't quit. What do you mean? I mean they make sure you can't quit. Surgical procedures, they call it, to help you stay focused on the job. I thought about the wires I'd seen running from the drivers' skulls to their control systems, the glassy, lifeless eyes, the mechanical movements. They turn them into robots, I whispered. Roy nodded. Remote-controlled drivers for a remote-controlled fleet, perfect for carrying cargo that doesn't officially exist. Since that conversation, I've avoided night driving as much as possible. When I do have to run after dark, I stick to the major interstates with lots of traffic and good lighting. I've never seen the Phantom Fleet again, but sometimes, late at night when the road is empty and quiet, I hear that mechanical voice on the CB. Integration is inevitable, it says. The network is expanding. And sometimes in truck stops and diners across the Southwest, I hear stories from other drivers. Stories about identical white trucks running perfect formations. Stories about drivers who accept mysterious, high-paying jobs and are never seen again. Stories about rest areas that aren't what they seem. The Phantom Fleet is still out there, running their invisible routes, carrying their invisible cargo, and they're always recruiting. If you're ever offered a job that seems too good to be true, ask yourself why. If the company has no verifiable address, no references, no history, walk away. And if you ever see 4 white trucks running perfect formation at night, don't try to make contact, just keep driving. and hope they don't notice you. Buck Morrison had been driving trucks for 31 years, but he'd never seen anything like what happened at the Crosswinds truck stop. Even now, 6 months later, he still wakes up some nights in a cold sweat, hearing those sounds echoing in his mind. It started as just another routine stop. Buck was hauling furniture from Houston to Phoenix, a straightforward run he'd made dozens of times. The Crosswinds was one of his regular stops. Good fuel prices, clean showers, and a diner that served decent food at reasonable prices. Located about 50 miles east of San Antonio, it sat at the intersection of Interstate 10 and a state highway that led north into ranch country. Buck pulled his rig into the truck parking area around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night in March. The lot was about half full, maybe 20 trucks scattered across the spaces, their running lights creating small pools of illumination in the darkness. He parked in his usual spot near the back, where the generator noise was quieter and the foot traffic lighter. As he performed his standard post-drive routine, checking the tires, inspecting the trailer locks, updating his logbook, Buck noticed a cluster of activity near the fuel pumps. 3 black SUVs were parked in a tight formation, and several men in expensive-looking suits were having what appeared to be an intense conversation. Nothing particularly unusual about that. The Crosswinds attracted all kinds of travelers, from long-haul drivers to oil field workers to businessmen cutting across Texas on their way to meetings in Austin or Dallas. But something about the group's body language caught Buck's attention. They kept glancing around, checking over their shoulders, and one of them had his hand inside his jacket in a way that suggested he was armed. Buck shrugged it off and headed for the diner. He'd learned long ago not to get too curious about other people's business. On the road, you saw all kinds of things, and the smart play was usually to mind your own affairs and keep moving. The diner was typical truck stop fare. Vinyl booths, fluorescent lighting, and a menu that hadn't changed since the Clinton administration. Buck took a seat at the counter and ordered his usual: coffee, chicken fried steak, and a slice of apple pie that came from a box, but tasted better than it had any right to. Marge, the night shift waitress, poured his coffee and leaned against the counter. She was in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from working too many late shifts. "Busy night," Buck commented, nodding toward the window where the black SUVs were still parked. Marge followed his gaze and her expression darkened slightly. "Those boys been here about an hour. Ordered coffee, but haven't touched it. Just sitting there talking and checking their phones." "Business meeting?" "Maybe." Marge lowered her voice. "But I've seen their type before. They're waiting for something, or someone." As if summoned by her words, headlights swept across the parking lot. A large van, white, windowless, the kind used by contractors and delivery services, pulled up next to the SUVs. Buck watched through the diner window as the suited men approached the van. The van's rear doors opened, and even from his position in the diner, Buck could see there were people inside. They looked young, maybe teenagers or early 20s, and they appeared to be restrained somehow. Zip ties, Buck thought, maybe drugged too, based on how they moved. "Jesus," he whispered. Marge was watching too, her face pale. "This ain't the first time," she said quietly. "Past few months, we've had these meetings maybe once or twice a week. Always the same setup. Fancy cars, unmarked vans, and people who don't look like they want to be here." Buck felt his stomach tighten. "Have you called the cops?" "What cops?" Marge laughed bitterly. "Sheriff's department is 40 miles away, and they've got maybe 3 deputies covering the whole county. By the time they got here, these people would be long gone." Through the window, Buck could see money changing hands. Thick envelopes passed from the SUVs to the van driver. Then, the people from the van were transferred to the SUVs, moving with the sluggish, uncoordinated gait of the heavily sedated. "How long has this been going on?" Buck asked. "Started maybe 6 months ago. Owner of this place, a guy named Vernon, he bought the truck stop from the previous owners last year. Since then, we've had all kinds of new customers. The kind who pay cash, don't make small talk, and get real unhappy if you pay too much attention to their business." One of the suited men was walking toward the diner. He was tall, thin, with the kind of dead eyes that Buck had seen before, usually in men who had done terrible things and made peace with it. "Act natural," Marge whispered, turning back to the coffee maker. The man entered the diner and looked around slowly, taking in every detail. His gaze lingered on Buck for a moment, then moved on. He approached the counter. "Coffee to go," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless, black. Marge poured the coffee into a styrofoam cup. "Will that be all?" The man placed a 20 on the counter. "Keep the change, and keep your eyes to yourself." As he turned to leave, Buck noticed a tattoo on the man's wrist. A small symbol that looked like 2 interlocking circles with a line through them. Gang marking, maybe, or some kind of organizational identifier. After the man left, Buck and Marge watched through the window as the transaction concluded. The people from the van had been loaded into the SUVs, and money had changed hands in both directions. It was clearly a well-rehearsed operation. The SUVs pulled out of the parking lot in convoy formation, heading west on Interstate 10. The van went north on the state highway, disappearing into the ranch country darkness. "Human trafficking," Buck said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marge nodded. "That's what I figure. Bringing people in from Mexico, maybe Central America, moving them to cities where they can be put to work in various industries." Buck thought about the young faces he'd seen in the van. Boys and girls who looked like they could have been high school students. Someone's children, stolen from their families and transported across the country like cargo. "We have to do something," he said. "Like what? Even if we called the FBI, what would we tell them? We saw some people change vehicles at a truck stop. Without license plates or names or any real evidence, it's just our word against theirs." Buck pulled out his phone and started to dial 911, but Marge put her hand over his. "Don't," she said urgently. "You don't understand how this works. Vernon, the owner, he's got connections. Local cops, county officials, people who make problems disappear. You start asking the wrong questions, you might find yourself having an accident on a dark highway. So we just let it happen? We survive. And we hope somebody with more power than us eventually shuts them down." Buck finished his meal in silence, watching the parking lot for any sign of more unusual activity. But the rest of the night passed quietly. Normal truck stop business. Drivers fueling up, grabbing snacks, using the restrooms. He paid his check and headed back to his rig, intending to get some sleep before continuing west in the morning. But as he approached his truck, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There was a note tucked under his windshield wiper. The paper was expensive, heavy stock, with a message written in block letters. "We noticed you noticing. Curiosity can be dangerous on the road." Buck looked around the parking lot, but saw no one watching him. He crumpled the note and threw it in his truck's trash bin, then climbed into the cab and locked all the doors. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his driver's seat with the engine running and his CB radio on, listening to the chatter from other drivers and waiting for dawn. When the sun came up, Buck fueled his truck and prepared to leave. But as he was doing his pre-trip inspection, Marge appeared at his elbow. "You need to see something," she said quietly. She led him around to the back of the truck stop, where the dumpsters were located. Behind the largest dumpster, partially hidden by shadows, was a small memorial. Flowers, photos, candles, and handwritten notes in Spanish. "What is this?" Buck asked. "Memorial for the ones who didn't make it," Marge explained. "Some of the people who come through here in those vans, they don't all survive the trip. Overdoses, medical problems, sometimes just plain violence. The bodies get dumped out in the desert, but their friends and families leave these memorials." Buck studied the photos. Young faces, mostly Latino, both male and female. Some looked like children. "How many?" "I've counted at least 30 different pictures over the past 6 months. Could be more." Buck felt sick. "And the local authorities know about this." Marge gave him a look that mixed pity with contempt. "Honey, who do you think provides security for these operations? Why do you think they chose this truck stop, out here in the middle of nowhere, with no witnesses and plenty of law enforcement willing to look the other way?" A black pickup truck pulled into the parking lot. Newer model, tinted windows, the kind of vehicle that screamed, "Don't mess with me." It parked near the memorial, and a man got out. He was wearing civilian clothes, but something about his bearing suggested military or law enforcement background. "That's Deputy Martinez," Marge whispered. "Vernon's cousin. He makes sure nobody asks too many questions about what happens here." Martinez noticed them standing by the memorial and started walking over. His right hand rested casually on the grip of a pistol holstered at his hip. "Morning, folks," he said pleasantly. "Y'all doing okay over here?" "Just showing our friend here where to dump his trash," Marge replied smoothly. Martinez looked at Buck with the kind of professional assessment that cops develop. "You're not local, passing through?" "Yes, sir, heading west on Interstate 10. "Good. Safe travels then. Road can be dangerous for folks who aren't familiar with the area. Easy to get lost, end up somewhere you shouldn't be." The threat was politely delivered, but unmistakable. Buck nodded and headed back to his truck. As he was climbing into the cab, Martinez called out to him. "Hey driver, what kind of cargo you hauling?" "Furniture, Houston to Phoenix." "Might want to check your load. Sometimes people try to slip extra items into trailers when drivers aren't watching. Wouldn't want you to get in trouble for carrying something you didn't know about." Buck felt his hands go cold. Was Martinez suggesting that someone had planted something in his trailer? Drugs? Evidence? Or was he just trying to scare him? Buck spent the next 20 minutes inspecting every inch of his trailer, looking for anything that didn't belong. He found nothing unusual, but the threat had achieved its purpose. He was thoroughly intimidated. He drove west toward Phoenix, but his mind kept returning to what he'd witnessed at the crosswinds. The young faces in the van, the memorial behind the dumpster, the casual corruption of Deputy Martinez. Somewhere around Junction, Buck made a decision. He pulled into a rest area and called the FBI field office in San Antonio. It took 3 transfers and 20 minutes of waiting, but he eventually reached an agent named Sarah Morrison who specialized in human trafficking cases. Buck told her everything: the midnight meeting, the SUVs and the van, the memorial, Deputy Martinez's threats. Agent Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You're describing a significant operation," she said when he finished. "The kind that requires substantial organization and official protection. We've been tracking similar networks across Texas, but we haven't been able to identify the transfer points. Can you shut them down?" "We can try, but we'll need evidence that will hold up in court. Testimony, photographs, financial records, and we'll need to move fast before they realize they've been compromised." Buck agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Agent Morrison arranged for him to carry a concealed camera and recording device on his next trip through the area. If he could document another midnight meeting, it might provide the evidence needed to bring down the network. 2 weeks later, Buck was back at the Crosswinds. This time, he was hauling electronics from Austin to Los Angeles, a route that gave him a legitimate reason to stop at the truck stop. He parked in the same spot as before and settled in to wait. The hidden camera was disguised as part of his CB radio antenna, and the recording device was built into his cell phone. If there was another meeting, he'd capture it all. The meeting happened right on schedule. Same black SUVs, same white van, same exchange of money and human cargo, but this time, Buck was ready. The camera captured clear images of the vehicles, license plates, and the faces of the men conducting the transaction. The audio recorder picked up conversations in both English and Spanish, including specific references to merchandise and delivery schedules. But something went wrong. As Buck was reviewing the footage on his phone, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Deputy Martinez was walking toward his truck, and this time he wasn't alone. 3 other men accompanied him, all armed. "Evening, driver," Martinez said as Buck rolled down his window. "Heard you've been asking questions around town." "Just minding my own business, officer." "See, that's the thing. Your business seems to involve a lot of interest in other people's activities. That can create problems for everyone involved." One of Martinez's companions was examining Buck's truck with professional thoroughness, checking for cameras or recording devices. It was only a matter of time before he found the equipment. "Here's what's going to happen," Martinez continued. "You're going to finish your delivery run and find a new route to California, one that doesn't go through this part of Texas, and you're going to forget everything you think you saw here." "And if I don't?" Martinez smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Well, then you might have one of those unfortunate accidents that happen to drivers who don't pay attention to road conditions. Mechanical failure, maybe, or a robbery gone wrong at some remote truck stop." The man searching Buck's truck had found the camera. He showed it to Martinez, who nodded grimly. "Seems like you've been doing more than minding your own business. That's disappointing." Martinez's phone buzzed. He answered it and listened for a moment, his expression growing darker. "Seems like you've also been talking to federal agents. It's very disappointing." Buck's mouth went dry. Somehow the network had been monitoring FBI communications, or maybe Agent Morrison had been compromised. Either way, his cover was blown. "You know what the penalty is for interfering with legitimate business operations?" Martinez asked conversationally. Before Buck could answer, headlights swept across the parking lot. A convoy of federal vehicles, FBI, DEA, and Texas Rangers, poured into the truck stop. Spotlights illuminated the entire area as agents deployed with military precision. Agent Morrison's voice came over a bullhorn. "Federal agents. Everyone on the ground now." The next few minutes were chaos. Martinez and his men scattered, drawing weapons and seeking cover behind trucks and buildings. The black SUVs tried to flee, but found their exit routes blocked by federal vehicles. Or was he just trying to scare him? Buck spent the next 20 minutes inspecting every inch of his trailer, looking for anything that didn't belong. He found nothing unusual, but the threat had achieved its purpose. He was thoroughly intimidated. He drove west toward Phoenix, but his mind kept returning to what he'd witnessed at the Crosswinds. The young faces in the van, the memorial behind the dumpster, the casual corruption of Deputy Martinez. Somewhere around Junction, Buck made a decision. He pulled into a rest area and called the FBI field office in San Antonio. It took 3 transfers and 20 minutes of waiting, but he eventually reached an agent named Sarah Morrison who specialized in human trafficking cases. Buck told her everything: the midnight meeting, the SUVs and the van, the memorial, Deputy Martinez's threats. Agent Morrison listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You're describing a significant operation," she said when he finished. "The kind that requires substantial organization and official protection. We've been tracking similar networks across Texas, but we haven't been able to identify the transfer points. Can you shut them down?" "We can try, but we'll need evidence that will hold up in court. Testimony, photographs, financial records, and we'll need to move fast before they realize they've been compromised." Buck agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Agent Morrison arranged for him to carry a concealed camera and recording device on his next trip through the area. If he could document another midnight meeting, it might provide the evidence needed to bring down the network. 2 weeks later, Buck was back at the Crosswinds. This time, he was hauling electronics from Austin to Los Angeles, a route that gave him a legitimate reason to stop at the truck stop. He parked in the same spot as before and settled in to wait. The hidden camera was disguised as part of his CB radio antenna, and the recording device was built into his cell phone. If there was another meeting, he'd capture it all. The meeting happened right on schedule. Same black SUVs, same white van, same exchange of money and human cargo, but this time, Buck was ready. The camera captured clear images of the vehicles, license plates, and the faces of the men conducting the transaction. The audio recorder picked up conversations in both English and Spanish, including specific references to merchandise and delivery schedules. But something went wrong. As Buck was reviewing the footage on his phone, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Deputy Martinez was walking toward his truck, and this time he wasn't alone. 3 other men accompanied him, all armed. "Evening, driver," Martinez said as Buck rolled down his window. "Heard you've been asking questions around town." "Just minding my own business, officer." "See, that's the thing. Your business seems to involve a lot of interest in other people's activities. That can create problems for everyone involved." One of Martinez's companions was examining Buck's truck with professional thoroughness, checking for cameras or recording devices. It was only a matter of time before he found the equipment. "Here's what's going to happen," Martinez continued. "You're going to finish your delivery run and find a new route to California, one that doesn't go through this part of Texas, and you're going to forget everything you think you saw here." "And if I don't?" Martinez smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Well, then you might have one of those unfortunate accidents that happen to drivers who don't pay attention to road conditions. Mechanical failure, maybe, or a robbery gone wrong at some remote truck stop." The man searching Buck's truck had found the camera. He showed it to Martinez, who nodded grimly. "Seems like you've been doing more than minding your own business. That's disappointing." Martinez's phone buzzed. He answered it and listened for a moment, his expression growing darker. "Seems like you've also been talking to federal agents. That's very disappointing." Buck's mouth went dry. Somehow the network had been monitoring FBI communications, or maybe Agent Morrison had been compromised. Either way, his cover was blown. "You know what the penalty is for interfering with legitimate business operations?" Martinez asked conversationally. Before Buck could answer, headlights swept across the parking lot. A convoy of federal vehicles, FBI, DEA, and Texas Rangers, poured into the truck stop. Spotlights illuminated the entire area as agents deployed with military precision. Agent Morrison's voice came over a bullhorn. "Federal agents. Everyone on the ground now." The next few minutes were chaos. Martinez and his men scattered, drawing weapons and seeking cover behind trucks and buildings. The black SUVs tried to flee, but found their exit routes blocked by federal vehicles. Rex Tanner should have known something was wrong when the hitchhiker started talking to himself before Rex even pulled over. Rex had been driving the I-35 corridor between Dallas and Kansas City for 12 years, hauling everything from auto parts to farm equipment. It was decent money for steady work, and the route was familiar enough that he could drive it in his sleep, which, considering what happened that September night, might have been safer than staying awake. He first spotted the hitchhiker around mile marker 147, just north of the Oklahoma border. The guy was standing under a broken streetlight at a rural off-ramp, thumb out, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. Nothing unusual there. Rex had picked up plenty of hitchers over the years. Most were just down-on-their-luck folks trying to get to the next town or the next job. But this one was different. Even from a quarter mile away, Rex could see the guy was animated, gesturing wildly with his free hand, apparently having an intense conversation with someone who wasn't there. Rex almost drove past. The smart play would have been to keep his eyes on the road and let someone else deal with the obviously disturbed individual. But something about the guy's posture, the way he kept looking over his shoulder, the way he seemed to be begging with his gestures, suggested genuine desperation. Against his better judgment, Rex eased his rig onto the shoulder and activated his hazard lights. The hitchhiker approached the passenger side at a half-run, half-stumble. Up close, Rex could see that the guy was probably in his 30s, with shoulder-length brown hair and the kind of hollow-eyed look that came from too many drugs and too little sleep. Thank God," the man muttered as Rex rolled down the passenger window. "They're coming, man. They're right behind me. I can hear the helicopters." Rex looked around. The night sky was clear and quiet except for the distant hum of interstate traffic. No helicopters, no vehicles in pursuit, no sign of anyone chasing the man. "Who's coming?" Rex asked. "The government, the CIA, FBI, maybe all of them." The hitchhiker glanced nervously over his shoulder. "They know what I saw. They know I was there when it happened. Classic paranoid delusion," Rex thought. Probably methamphetamine psychosis. He'd seen it before. Users who stayed awake for days, their minds fragmenting into conspiracy theories and impossible scenarios. "Look, friend, maybe you should—" "Please," the man interrupted. "Just give me a ride to the next truck stop. That's all I need. 20 minutes, maybe 30. I've got family in Tulsa. They can help me disappear." Rex hesitated. The guy was clearly having some kind of breakdown, but he didn't seem violent, just scared and confused. And if Rex left him here on this isolated stretch of highway, something bad might happen to him. "What's your name?" Rex asked. Hank Jessup. I used to work for a chemical company down in Texas, before I found out what they were really doing." "Get in," Rex said, unlocking the passenger door. "But we need to establish some ground rules. No sudden movements, no touching anything, and if you start getting aggressive, you're getting dropped off at the next exit." Hank climbed into the cab, bringing with him the smell of unwashed clothes and something chemical, sharp and acrid, like industrial solvent mixed with human sweat. "Thank you," he said, settling into the passenger seat. "You don't know what this means. They've been tracking me for 3 days, ever since I escaped from the facility." "What facility?" Rex asked, pulling back onto the interstate. "The one where they were making it, the new formula. They called it Project Clarity, but it wasn't clear at all. It was the opposite. It made people see things that weren't there, made them do things they'd never do normally." Rex glanced at his passenger. Hank was staring out the window with the intense focus of someone scanning for threats. His hands were trembling slightly and he kept licking his lips like his mouth was dry. What kind of chemical company was this? "Ostensibly, we made industrial solvents and agricultural pesticides, standard stuff, all legitimate, but there was a separate division. Black budget working on something else. Psychological warfare agents, drugs that could incapacitate enemy troops or make civilian populations more compliant. Hank turned to look at Rex directly. The thing is, they weren't just testing it on lab rats. They were using it on people. Volunteers at first, then prisoners, then anyone they could get their hands on. This was getting into seriously delusional territory, Rex thought. Military drug experiments, government conspiracies, secret facilities, all the classic elements of paranoid fantasy. And you worked for them? I was a lab technician. My job was to measure dosages and record effects. I thought I was helping develop new medicines. Antidepressants, maybe, or treatments for PTSD. Hank's voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't know they were turning people into monsters. Monsters? Hank was quiet for several miles, staring out at the dark Oklahoma landscape. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more lucid, more focused. Have you ever seen someone completely lose their grip on reality? Not just confusion or disorientation, but total dissolution of the boundary between what's real and what's imagined. Actually, Rex thought, I'm looking at someone like that right now. But he didn't say it. The drug, they called it Compound 7. It didn't just cause hallucinations. It rewrote people's perception of reality, made them believe their hallucinations were real and that reality was the illusion. Hank pulled something from his pocket, a small glass vial containing a clear liquid. This is the last sample. I stole it when I escaped, proof of what they were doing. Rex glanced at the vial. It looked like water, or maybe vodka. Nothing particularly sinister about it. Why don't you just turn it over to the police, or the FBI? Hank laughed bitterly. You think the cops aren't involved. You think this kind of operation happens without federal approval. The facility was funded through Department of Defense. Black budgets. The test subjects were provided by the Bureau of Prisons. This goes all the way to the top. They drove in silence for a while, Rex trying to process what he was hearing. It was obviously the product of a drug-damaged mind, but there was something compelling about Hank's delivery. He spoke with the kind of specific detail that usually indicated first-hand experience. Tell me about the facility, Rex said. Where was it located? About 40 miles southeast of Dallas. Looked like a normal industrial complex from the outside. Chain-link fence, security guards, trucks coming and going. But underground there were laboratories and holding cells, places where they kept the test subjects while the drugs worked through their systems. Hank's hands were shaking more noticeably now, and he kept wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool night air. The worst part wasn't the testing. It was what happened afterward. The people who survived the experiments, they couldn't function in normal society anymore. They'd been so damaged that they could never distinguish between reality and hallucination. So the company would relocate them. Relocate them where? Mental institutions. Homeless shelters. Sometimes they'd just dump them on rural highways and let them wander. Hank looked at Rex with desperate intensity. Most of them ended up dead within a few months. Exposure, accidents, suicide. The company counted on that. It was the final stage of the experiment, studying how long subjects would survive once released into the wild. A chill ran down Rex's spine. Not because he believed Hank's story, but because of the way the man told it. There was no excitement or embellishment, just a flat, factual recitation of horrors. How many people? Rex asked. Over the 3 years I worked there? Maybe 200. Mostly homeless individuals, prison inmates, undocumented immigrants, people nobody would miss. That's when Rex noticed the helicopter. It was flying low, maybe 500 feet above the interstate, keeping pace with his truck. No lights, just a dark shape against the star-filled sky. "There," Hank said, pointing upward. "See? I told you they were coming." Rex squinted at the aircraft. It could have been a police helicopter, or maybe military. But why would it be following his truck? And why, with no navigation lights? The helicopter pulled ahead and disappeared over a ridge. Rex told himself it was probably just a coincidence. Law enforcement conducting some kind of routine patrol. But 20 minutes later it was back. This time flying directly overhead, low enough that Rex could hear the rotor blades over the noise of his engine. "They're tracking us," Hank said matter-of-factly. "Probably using thermal imaging or GPS. They know exactly where we are." "Who? Who's tracking us?" "Corporate security, government cleanup crews, maybe both." Hank held up the vial again. They can't let this evidence reach the public. Too many people would ask questions about where it came from. The helicopter maintained its position above them for another 10 minutes, then peeled off and headed southeast. Back toward Texas, Rex noted. "We need to get off the interstate," Hank said. "They're probably setting up roadblocks ahead." Rex was starting to feel genuinely unnerved. The helicopter might have been a coincidence, but it was an awfully strange one. And Hank's paranoid delusions were starting to feel less delusional. "There's a truck stop at the next exit," Rex said. "Lots of people, good lighting. If someone's really following us, they won't try anything there." "No!" Hank grabbed Rex's arm. "Truck stops are perfect for them. Isolated, lots of transient traffic, minimal security. They can make us disappear and nobody will ever know what happened." Rex shook off Hank's grip. "Then what do you suggest?" "Back roads, small towns, places where we can blend in with local traffic." Against his better judgment, Rex took the next exit. It led to a 2-lane county road that headed north through rural farming country. The landscape was mostly flat fields and scattered farmhouses, with occasional clusters of trees marking creek beds. They drove for 30 minutes without seeing another vehicle. The isolation should have been comforting, but instead it made Rex more nervous. If something happened out here, there would be no witnesses and no help. That's when Hank started talking to himself again. No, that's not right," he muttered, staring out the passenger window. "The dosage was too high. We should have reduced the concentration before the final trials." "Hank, who are you talking to?" "Dr. Morrison. He's in the back seat. Can't you see him?" Rex glanced in his rearview mirror. The sleeper compartment was empty. "There's nobody back there, Hank. He wants to know why I stole the sample. Says the company is willing to negotiate. They'll give me a new identity, relocate me somewhere safe, as long as I return the vial and keep quiet about the project." This was bad. Hank was having a full psychotic break, probably triggered by whatever drugs he'd taken. Rex needed to get him to a hospital, or at least to somewhere with other people. "Tell Dr. Morrison. I'll consider his offer," Rex said, hoping to keep Hank calm. "But first I need to get some sleep. There's a motel up ahead." "He says that's acceptable, but he wants the vial as a sign of good faith." Hank reached into his pocket and withdrew the small glass container. In the dim light from the dashboard, the liquid inside seemed to glow with its own phosphorescence. "Don't touch that," Rex said sharply. "Whatever's in there, it could be dangerous." "It's not dangerous if you know how to use it properly. The trick is the dosage. Too little and nothing happens. Too much, and the subject loses all contact with consensus reality." Hank held the vial up to the light. "But just the right amount, that's when the magic happens." "What kind of magic?" "Enhanced perception." the ability to see beyond the normal spectrum of experience. Colors that don't exist, sounds that can't be heard, thoughts that belong to other people. Hank unscrewed the cap of the vial. "Don't," Rex said, but it was too late. Hank tilted the vial to his lips and drank about half the contents. The effect was almost immediate. Hank's pupils dilated to black circles, and his breathing became rapid and shallow. He began making small sounds, not words, just vocalized responses to whatever he was seeing or hearing. "Oh," he whispered. "Oh, I understand now. The helicopters aren't following us, they're hurting us." Rex glanced at the sky. Sure enough, there were aircraft visible, at least 3 of them, flying in a loose triangle formation around his truck. Herding us toward what? The collection point, where they gather subjects for transport back to the facility. Rex realized he was probably hallucinating too. Not from any drug, but from psychological contamination. Spending too much time with someone whose grip on reality was completely shot. It was a documented phenomenon. People could literally catch insanity from prolonged exposure to psychotic individuals. But the helicopters were still there. Rex could see them clearly, hear the sound of their rotors. If they were hallucinations, they were remarkably convincing ones. "We have to get off the road," Rex said. "Too late. Look ahead." Rex looked. About half a mile ahead, red and blue lights were flashing. A roadblock, with several vehicles and what appeared to be uniformed officers. "State police," Rex said. "That's good. They can help us." "Those aren't police," Hank said quietly. "Those are corporate security wearing police uniforms. They do that sometimes to make the collection process look legitimate." Rex slowed the truck, unsure what to do. The roadblock was directly ahead, and there was no way around it. The county road was bordered by deep ditches on both sides, with barbed wire fencing beyond that. As they approached, Rex could see that the police officers were unusually tall and moved with military precision. Their uniforms were too clean, too new, and they wore sunglasses despite the darkness. "Stop the truck," one of them commanded, stepping into the roadway with his hand raised. Rex brought his rig to a halt about 50 feet from the roadblock. Through the windshield, he could see the officer approaching. Up close, the man's face was wrong somehow. Too symmetrical, too perfect, like a computer-generated image of what a police officer should look like. "Good evening, gentlemen," the officer said as Rex rolled down his window. "We're conducting a safety inspection. Please step out of the vehicle." "What's the nature of the inspection?" Rex asked. "Routine drug interdiction. We have reports of illegal substances being transported through this area." Rex felt his mouth go dry. Hank still had the vial in his hand, and there was no telling what other drugs he might be carrying. "I'm going to need to see your commercial driver's license and shipping manifests," the officer continued. Rex handed over his documents. The officer examined them with a small electronic device that beeped and flashed red lights. "Mr. Tanner, our records show that you picked up an unauthorized passenger at mile marker 147. Is that correct?" How could they possibly know that? Rex had picked up Hank less than 2 hours ago on a dark stretch of a highway with no witnesses. "I gave a ride to someone who needed help," Rex said carefully. "Mr. Jessup is wanted in connection with the theft of classified materials from a federal research facility. We're going to need both of you to come with us." "I haven't done anything wrong," Rex protested. "You're harboring a fugitive and transporting stolen government property. That's a federal crime." The officer's radio crackled to life. "Control, this is Unit 7. We have the subjects in custody, requesting immediate transport to the facility." "Copy that, Unit 7. Transport is en route." Rex looked at Hank, who was staring straight ahead with a strange smile on his face. "They think they've caught us," Hank said quietly. "But they don't understand what the drug really does. It doesn't just make you see things that aren't there. It makes you see things that are there but hidden." "What are you talking about?" "Look at their faces, really look." Rex focused on the officer outside his window. At first, the man appeared normal, middle-aged, clean-shaven, professional. But as Rex continued to stare, subtle details began to emerge. The skin was too smooth, too uniform in color. The eyes didn't blink at the proper intervals. And when the man spoke, his lips didn't quite sync with the words. "They're not human," Hank whispered. "They're some kind of artificial construct. Androids, maybe, or people who've been so heavily modified that they're no longer really alive." Rex wanted to dismiss this as drug-induced paranoia, but he was seeing the same impossible details. The officer's movements were too precise, too mechanical. His breathing was so regular it sounded like a machine. "Why can I see it?" Rex asked. Hank held up the vial, which was now empty. "You breathed the vapors when I opened it. Not enough to cause full-blown hallucinations, but enough to enhance your perception. You're seeing through their camouflage." More vehicles were arriving, black SUVs with tinted windows, a white van with no markings, and what appeared to be a mobile laboratory unit. Men in hazmat suits began unloading equipment. "Step out of the vehicle now," the officer commanded. His voice had changed, becoming more electronic and less human. Rex looked at Hank. "What do we do?" "We run. The drug's effects are temporary. Maybe another hour before your enhanced perception wears off. If we can stay free until then, they'll lose track of us." "How?" "Their detection equipment is calibrated for normal human perception. Right now, you can see their real forms, which means you can also see their weaknesses." Hank pointed at the roadblock. "Look at the vehicles. Do they look solid to you?" Rex stared at the police cars and SUVs. They appeared normal at first, but as he focused, he began to see through them. They were holographic projections, sophisticated but not perfect. The real vehicles were parked about 100 yards away, partially hidden behind a line of trees. "It's all fake," Rex breathed. "Most of it. The officers are real, but they're not human. The vehicles are projections. Even the road we're on isn't the road you think it is." Rex looked down at the asphalt beneath his truck. It shimmed and wavered like heat waves, and for a moment he could see another surface beneath it. Dirt and gravel, as if they were actually driving through an open field. "We're not on the county road at all, are we?" "Number?" "They diverted us about 10 miles back, using some kind of perception-altering field. We've been driving through their testing area, thinking we were on public highways." The officer was getting impatient. He drew what appeared to be a pistol, but in Rex's enhanced vision it looked more like a medical injector. "Final warning. Exit the vehicle or we will use force." Rex made a decision. He slammed the truck into gear and floored the accelerator, driving straight at the holographic roadblock. The artificial officer dove aside with inhuman speed, rolling and coming up in a crouch. As Rex's truck passed through the projected vehicles, they flickered and vanished. The real roadblock was still ahead, but now Rex could see it clearly. Hastily assembled concrete barriers and a handful of actual security personnel. "Hard left!" Hank shouted. "Through those trees!" Rex yanked the wheel left, sending the 18-wheeler crashing through a line of saplings and into an open field. The truck bounced and lurched over the uneven terrain, but held together. Behind them, the security team was mobilizing. Real vehicles this time. Armored trucks and all-terrain vehicles designed for pursuit across rough country. "Where are we going?" Rex yelled over the noise of the engine and the crash of braking vegetation. "There's a highway about 2 miles north. Real highway, not one of their projections. If we can reach it, we'll be back in normal space." Rex pushed the truck as hard as he dared across the field. The headlights illuminated a landscape that seemed to shift and change as they moved. Sometimes farmland, sometimes desert, sometimes suburban neighborhoods. None of it was stable or consistent. "The whole area is an illusion," Hank explained. "They use a combination of drugs in the water supply and electromagnetic fields to create false environments. People drive through here thinking they're on normal roads, but they're actually in a controlled testing zone." A helicopter appeared overhead, this time visible and audible. It began firing some kind of energy weapon that left scorch marks in the earth around Rex's truck. "They're trying to disable us, not kill us," Hank observed. "They need us alive for questioning." Rex spotted a line of hills ahead. If he could reach them, the terrain might provide cover from the helicopter. He angled the truck toward the highest ridge, ignoring the protesting sounds from the engine. The pursuit vehicles were gaining ground. They were designed for off-road travel, while Rex's truck was built for highways. It was only a matter of time before they caught up. "There," Hank pointed toward a gap between 2 hills. "That's the exit point, the boundary between their artificial environment and real space." Rex could see it now, a shimmering distortion in the air, like looking through water. As they approached, the landscape around them became more unstable, flickering between different environments. They hit the boundary at 60 miles per hour. For a moment, Rex felt like he was falling through empty space. Then, with a sensation like breaking through the surface of a lake, they emerged onto a real highway. Rex's enhanced perception immediately began to fade. The pursuing vehicles, which had been clearly visible moments before, were now nowhere to be seen. The helicopter was gone. Even the landscape looked different. Normal Oklahoma farmland instead of the shifting unreality they'd escaped from. "We made it," Hank said quietly. "We're back in normal space." Rex pulled over at the first truck stop he saw, a genuine, ordinary travel plaza with normal customers and normal employees. As he parked, the last of the drug's effects wore off, and the whole experience began to feel like a bizarre dream. "Did that really happen?" he asked. Hank was already getting out of the truck. "Some of it. Maybe all of it. The drug makes it hard to distinguish between enhanced perception and hallucination." "Where are you going?" "Tulsa, like I said. I have family there." Hank paused. "Rex, I need you to forget about tonight. The chemical company, the testing facility, everything. If you start asking questions, they'll find you." "What about you?" Hank smiled sadly. "I'm already dead. Have been for 3 days since I first took Compound 7. The person you picked up tonight was just an echo, a projection created by the drug. The real Hank Jessup died in that laboratory." Before Rex could respond, Hank walked away into the truck stop, disappearing among the normal late-night travelers. Rex sat in his cab for a long time, trying to process what had happened. Eventually, he decided it had all been some kind of shared hallucination, triggered by whatever chemicals Hank had been carrying. Drug-induced paranoia amplified by isolation and darkness. But 3 weeks later, Rex read a news story about a chemical plant explosion outside Dallas. The facility had been conducting classified research for the Department of Defense when a lab accident killed 17 employees and contaminated the surrounding area. The bodies of the victims had never been recovered. Among the names of the deceased was Henry Hank Jessup, laboratory technician. The official cause of the explosion was listed as equipment malfunction. but sources close to the investigation suggested that someone had deliberately sabotaged the facility, stealing samples of experimental compounds before setting off the blast. The saboteur had never been identified. Rex never drove through that part of Oklahoma again. He found alternate routes that added hours to his trips, but kept him away from the rural roads where reality seemed negotiable, and the boundaries between perception and truth became meaningless. Sometimes, late at night on empty highways, he still thought he could see helicopters in his peripheral vision. But when he looked directly at them, they were never there. And sometimes, when he passed hitchhikers on lonely stretches of road, he thought he recognized Hank's face. But he never stopped to pick them up. Because some passengers carry more than just themselves. Some carry entire alternate realities that can infect your perception and drag you into worlds where the distinction between real and imagined becomes just another illusion to be manipulated. And once you've seen behind the curtain of consensus reality, you can never be entirely sure which side of it you're really on. Travis Wheeler had been running loads across I-80 for 8 years when he first encountered Cliff Morrison at the Paradise Way station. It was a routine stop. Travis was hauling computer equipment from Sacramento to Denver, well under his weight limit, with all his paperwork in order. The kind of stop that should have taken 15 minutes and cost him nothing but time. Cliff was new to the station. Travis knew all the regular inspectors, guys who'd been working the scales for years, and understood that truckers were just trying to make a living, professional relationships built on mutual respect. But Cliff was different from the start. Younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of aggressive attitude that suggested he had something to prove. "Pull around to Bay 3 for inspection," Cliff announced after Travis's truck crossed the scales. "Is there a problem, officer?" "My weight's legal, logbooks current. Random safety inspection. Happens to about 1 in every 50 trucks." Travis knew that wasn't true. Random inspections happened maybe once in every 200 trucks, and usually only when there was reason for suspicion. But he also knew better than to argue with DOT enforcement. These guys could make your life hell if they wanted to. Bay 3 was equipped with a hydraulic lift that could raise the entire truck for undercarriage inspection. As Cliff directed Travis to position his rig over the lift, Travis noticed another inspector watching from the office window. Older guy, gray hair, expression that looked worried. "Shut her down and step out," Cliff ordered. Travis complied, climbing down from the cab as Cliff began his inspection. What followed was the most thorough and aggressive examination Travis had ever experienced. Cliff checked every light, every brake line, every piece of safety equipment. He measured tire tread depth with a gauge and tested the air brake system twice. "Your 5th wheel pin's looking a little worn," Cliff announced, pointing to the coupling mechanism that connected the truck to the trailer. Travis looked at the pin. It was in perfect condition, well within safety specifications. "That pin's only 6 months old, just passed inspection in California." "California standards aren't Nevada standards. I'm writing you up for unsafe coupling device." The fine was $2,800. Enough to wipe out Travis's profit on the entire run. "I want a second opinion," Travis said. Cliff smiled coldly. "You can request a supervisor review, but it'll cost you a $500 administrative fee. And you'll have to wait here until someone's available. Could be several hours." Travis looked at his watch. He was already behind schedule, and the delivery in Denver was time-sensitive. Missing the appointment would cost him the contract. "Or," Cliff continued, "we could work something out. I know a repair shop about 10 miles up the road. They could install a new 5th wheel pin for you. Probably run about $800. but you'd be back on the road in an hour. Travis understood. This wasn't about safety. This was about money. Cliff was running some kind of kickback scheme with a local repair shop, manufacturing violations to generate business. "That's extortion," Travis said quietly. "That's enforcement," Cliff replied. "Your choice. Pay the fine and wait for a supervisor, or get the pin replaced and continue your run. What's it going to be?" Travis paid for the unnecessary repair. He didn't have a choice. But as he drove away from the shop with a perfectly good fifth wheel pin that had been replaced with an identical part, he made a mental note to report Cliff Morrison to the Nevada Department of Transportation. That report went nowhere. Travis received a form letter 3 weeks later stating that his complaint had been investigated and found to be without merit. No details, no explanation, just a bureaucratic dismissal. Over the next 6 months, Travis heard similar stories from other drivers. Cliff Morrison was writing bogus violations and directing truckers to the same repair shop for unnecessary work. The scheme was netting him thousands of dollars per month in kickbacks, and apparently he had enough protection within the system to operate with impunity. But Travis also heard darker stories. Drivers who refused to pay Cliff's extortion fees were finding themselves targeted for harassment. Multiple inspections, extended delays, equipment mysteriously failing immediately after leaving the weigh station. And then there were the disappearances. The first was a driver named Wayne Patterson, an independent owner-operator who'd been vocal about Cliff's corruption. Wayne had been hauling steel coils from Utah to California when he stopped at Paradise for weighing. According to the logbooks, he'd left the station on schedule, but he never arrived at his destination. Wayne's truck was found 3 days later in a ravine about 30 miles south of the weigh station. He'd apparently lost control on a mountain curve and rolled down a steep embankment. Wayne was thrown from the cab and died instantly. The load of steel coils had shifted during the rollover, crushing the sleeping compartment of his truck. The official investigation concluded that Wayne had fallen asleep at the wheel. Case closed. But other drivers knew Wayne had a perfect safety record over 15 years of driving. He was obsessively careful, especially on mountain roads. The second disappearance was a month later. Dutch Vanderberg, another owner-operator, who'd been asking questions about Cliff Morrison's business practices. Dutch was hauling produce from California to Chicago when he stopped at Paradise. Like Wayne, he left the station according to the logs, but never made his delivery. Dutch's truck was found at the bottom of a different ravine, this one about 20 miles east of the weigh station. Another single-vehicle accident, another driver allegedly falling asleep at the wheel. Dutch's cargo of lettuce and tomatoes was scattered across the crash site, attracting coyotes and vultures. By the time the third driver disappeared, Travis realized they weren't dealing with coincidences anymore. Someone was murdering truckers who threatened Cliff Morrison's operation, and that someone had enough knowledge of the routes and enough resources to make the killings look like accidents. The third victim was Curtis Hendricks, a company driver who'd been gathering evidence of the corruption at Paradise. Curtis had been photographing the bogus repair orders and recording conversations with Cliff. He'd planned to take his evidence to the FBI field office in Reno. Curtis never made it to Reno. His truck went off the road on Highway 50, a notorious stretch of mountain highway known locally as the loneliest road in America. The vehicle burned after the crash, destroying Curtis and most of the evidence he'd collected. Travis knew he had to do something. The official channels were compromised and truckers were dying, but he also knew that if he acted openly, he'd probably become the fourth victim. So he developed a different plan. Travis started carrying a concealed digital camera during his runs through Nevada. Every time he stopped at Paradise, he documented his interactions with Cliff Morrison. He recorded audio of their conversations using his cell phone. He photographed the bogus violation notices and repair orders. More importantly, he began tracking the pattern of Cliff's extortion scheme. Which drivers were targeted, how much money was involved, where the victims were directed for repairs. He mapped out the entire network of corruption, from Cliff's initial shakedowns to the kickbacks from the repair shops. What he discovered was bigger than he'd imagined. Cliff Morrison wasn't just running a simple extortion racket. He was part of a larger criminal organization that included other DOT inspectors, local law enforcement, and several automotive repair businesses across Nevada. They were systematically fleecing truckers for millions of dollars per year, and when drivers threatened to expose the operation, they were eliminated. Travis documented everything: names, dates, amounts, locations. He built a comprehensive case file that would be impossible for authorities to ignore or dismiss. But he also knew that submitting the evidence through normal channels would be suicide. Too many people in the system were compromised. He needed a different approach. Travis contacted an investigative journalist named Sarah Martinez, who worked for a national trucking magazine. Sarah had built a reputation exposing corruption in the transportation industry, and she had sources throughout federal law enforcement. "This is bigger than Nevada," Sarah told Travis after reviewing his evidence. "We've been tracking similar operations in 6 other states. Interstate trucking fraud is a billion-dollar criminal enterprise." Sarah arranged for Travis to meet with FBI agents from outside the Nevada jurisdiction. The meeting took place at a truck stop in Utah, away from Cliff Morrison's sphere of influence. Special Agent Robert Morrison reviewed Travis's evidence with intense interest. "Mr. Wheeler, what you've documented here constitutes a RICO case: racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, and possibly murder. We've been trying to infiltrate this network for 2 years. Why hasn't anyone been arrested?" "Because the corruption goes deeper than anyone realized. We have judges taking bribes, prosecutors who won't file charges, local cops who provide security for the operation. Your evidence is the break we've been waiting for." Agent Morrison explained the FBI's plan. They would use Travis as an undercover informant, equipping him with sophisticated recording equipment and surveillance gear. His job would be to continue documenting Cliff Morrison's activities while the FBI built cases against the entire network. "It's dangerous," Morrison warned. "If they discover you're working with us, you'll end up like the other 3 drivers." Travis thought about Wayne, Dutch, and Curtis. Good men who died trying to do the right thing. What happens if I don't help you? The operation continues. More drivers get extorted, more evidence gets covered up, more people die. Travis agreed to cooperate. Over the next 2 months, Travis made 6 trips through the Paradise Way station, each time carrying FBI surveillance equipment. He documented Cliff Morrison taking bribes, directing truckers to fraudulent repair shops, and coordinating with other corrupt officials. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. During his 5th undercover visit, Travis overheard a phone conversation between Cliff and someone identified only as the Colonel. They were discussing a problem driver who was asking too many questions about recent accidents on Nevada highways. "Same solution as before?" Cliff asked. "Affirmative. Highway 93, mile marker 47. Make it look like brake failure." Travis realized they were planning another murder. A driver named Roy Hutchins was being targeted for elimination because he'd been investigating the suspicious accident that killed Curtis Hendricks. Travis immediately contacted Agent Martinez, who mobilized a federal task force. Roy Hutchins was intercepted before he reached the planned ambush site, and FBI agents moved in to arrest Cliff Morrison and his associates. The raid on the Paradise Way station uncovered evidence of a criminal conspiracy that spanned 7 states and involved more than 40 individuals. In addition to the extortion and fraud charges, prosecutors found evidence linking the network to the murders of Wayne Patterson, Dutch Vanderberg, and Curtis Hendricks. Cliff Morrison was convicted on 23 federal charges, including racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of civil rights under color of authority. He received a life sentence without possibility of parole. The investigation also revealed that the repair shops involved in the scheme had been installing defective parts in some trucks, creating genuine safety hazards that could cause accidents. The shops had liability insurance policies that covered accident settlements, so they actually profited when their sabotaged vehicles crashed. The colonel turned out to be a retired military officer named Frank Sullivan, who had been coordinating the murder operations. Sullivan had specialized in making deaths look accidental, using his knowledge of vehicle mechanics and highway engineering to create perfect crime scenes. Sullivan was found dead in his jail cell 3 days after his arrest, apparently having committed suicide with a hidden cyanide capsule. However, investigators suspected he'd been eliminated to prevent him from revealing other aspects of the conspiracy. The investigation ultimately resulted in 127 arrests across 7 states, dismantling what federal prosecutors called the largest interstate trucking fraud conspiracy in U.S. history. The network had stolen an estimated $200 million from truckers over a 5-year period. Travis Wheeler received a $100,000 reward from the FBI for his cooperation in the investigation. He also received death threats from associates of the disbanded criminal network who had avoided arrest. Travis sold his truck and retired from long-haul driving. He now works as a safety consultant for trucking companies, helping them identify and avoid corruption in the transportation system. But he still thinks about the drivers who died trying to expose Cliff Morrison's operation. Wayne Patterson, Dutch Vanderberg, Curtis Hendricks, men who were killed for doing nothing more than trying to make an honest living in a corrupt system. And he wonders how many other way stations across the country are running similar schemes. How many DOT inspectors are supplementing their salaries with extortion money? How many truckers are being systematically robbed by the officials who are supposed to protect them? The Paradise Way station was closed permanently after the raid. The building sits empty now, surrounded by chain-link fence and warning signs. Truckers on I-80 use alternate routes to avoid the area, even though the danger has passed. Because once you've seen how deep the corruption can go, how many officials can be bought, and how easily murder can be disguised as accident, you never quite trust the system again. And every time you pull into a way station, you wonder if the inspector approaching your truck is there to enforce the law or to profit from breaking it. Travis learned that the scales of justice aren't always balanced. Sometimes they're rigged by people who have turned law enforcement into a criminal enterprise, using their badges and authority to steal from the people they've sworn to protect. And sometimes the only way to restore balance is to risk everything, including your life, to expose the truth. Wayne Patterson had been running the Cheyenne to Salt Lake City route for 9 years when the disappearances started. At first, nobody connected them. Truckers went missing all the time. Breakdowns in remote areas, medical emergencies. Guys who just walked away from the life without telling anyone. But this was different. This was systematic. Wayne first heard about it from his dispatcher, Maria Santos, who handled freight coordination for independent operators out of Denver. She called him on a Tuesday morning in January, her voice tight with worry. "We got a problem, Wayne. That's 3 drivers in 2 months who've gone missing on the Wyoming stretch of I-80. All of them were hauling high-value cargo. All of them disappeared between Rock Springs and Rawlins. Wayne knew that stretch well. 80 miles of empty highway cutting through some of the most desolate country in America. Wind-scoured plains, scattered ranches, and long gaps between fuel stops. The kind of road where you could drive for an hour without seeing another vehicle. "What kind of high-value cargo?" Wayne asked. "Electronics, mostly. Computers, servers, that kind of thing. Stuff that's easy to fence and hard to trace." Wayne was scheduled to make that exact run in 3 days, hauling a trailer full of computer equipment from a tech company in Cheyenne to a distributor in Salt Lake. The load was worth close to $2 million, exactly the kind of target that might attract hijackers. "You want me to reroute through Colorado?" "That's your call, but the company's getting nervous about insurance claims. We lose another load, they might drop us entirely." Wayne considered his options. The Colorado route would add 6 hours to the trip and eat up most of his profit margin. The Wyoming route was faster, more direct, and he'd driven it hundreds of times without incident. But 3 missing drivers suggested something more organized than random highway crime. "I'll stick with 80, Wayne decided, "but I'm going to be extra careful." Maria's relief was audible. "Good. Just keep your eyes open, okay, and check in every hour." Wayne spent the next 2 days researching the missing drivers. Tommy Kowalski had vanished on November 15th, hauling medical equipment from Denver to Reno. His truck was found 3 days later in a ravine about 40 miles east of Rock Springs, burned beyond recognition. Tommy's body was never recovered. Dale Martinez disappeared on December 3rd, while transporting computer servers from Colorado to California. His rig was discovered abandoned at a rest area near Rawlins, engine running, driver's door open. No signs of struggle, no indication of where Dale had gone. The cargo was gone too. 23 pallets of high-end servers worth over $1 million. Most recently, Curtis Thompson had vanished on January 8th. He'd been hauling electronics from Wyoming to Nevada when he stopped responding to radio calls. His truck was found overturned in a ditch near mile marker 187, apparently the victim of a single vehicle rollover. Curtis was thrown from the cab and killed instantly, but the cargo had been removed before authorities arrived. The pattern was clear. Someone was targeting high-value electronics shipments on Interstate 80, using methods that ranged from hijacking to murder. Wayne made a mental note to avoid rest areas and stick to major truck stops with good security. On January 21st, Wayne loaded his trailer in Cheyenne and headed west. The weather was clear but cold, with temperatures hovering around 0 and a steady wind out of the north. Perfect conditions for making good time, if he could avoid whatever had happened to the other drivers. The first 100 miles were routine. Light traffic, good road conditions, no sign of anything unusual. Wayne maintained radio contact with dispatch every hour, reporting his position and progress. Everything was normal until he reached Rock Springs. That's where he first noticed the truck following him. It was a black Peterbilt, maybe 10 years old, running about a quarter mile behind Wayne's rig. Nothing unusual about that. Trucks often traveled in loose convoys for safety and company. But this one maintained exactly the same distance regardless of Wayne's speed. When Wayne slowed down, it slowed down. When he sped up, it matched his pace. Wayne tried raising the driver on CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is westbound Wayne looking for that black Pete about a quarter mile back. You got your ears on?" No response. Wayne switched channels and tried again. Still nothing. After 30 miles, Wayne pulled into a truck stop in Rock Springs for fuel. The black Peterbilt drove past without stopping, disappearing into the distance. Wayne shrugged it off as coincidence and focused on his pre-trip inspection. That's when he noticed the GPS tracker. It was attached to the underside of his trailer, hidden behind the landing gear where it wouldn't be visible during a casual inspection. The device was about the size of a cigarette pack, with a small antenna and a blinking red LED. Wayne's blood ran cold. Someone had been tracking his movements, probably since he'd left Cheyenne. The black Peterbilt might have been following him, but whoever was responsible already knew exactly where he was. Wayne pulled the tracker off and examined it. Professional-grade equipment, not the kind of thing a casual thief would use. This was sophisticated, expensive, and suggested a well-funded operation. He called dispatch immediately. "Maria, we got a problem. Someone planted a GPS tracker on my rig." "What? Are you sure?" "I'm holding it in my hand. Military-grade hardware. Looks like it's been transmitting my location for hours." Maria was quiet for a long moment. "Wayne, I want you to turn around and come back. This is bigger than we thought. No way. If I turn back now, they'll know I found the tracker. Better to keep going and see what they're planning." "That's too dangerous. These people have killed 3 drivers already." Wayne looked around the truck stop. Normal activity. Drivers fueling up, grabbing food, checking their loads. No one seemed to be paying any attention to him. But somewhere in that crowd might be the people who'd planted the tracker. "I'm going to disable the tracker and continue the run," Wayne said. "If they're monitoring it, they'll think I stopped here for fuel and food. By the time they realize something's wrong, I'll be long gone. Wayne, please, just come back." "I can't, Maria. If we don't deliver this load, the company will drop us. I've got truck payments to make." Wayne crushed the tracker under his boot and scattered the pieces in a trash can. Then he pulled out of the truck stop and continued west on Interstate 80, hoping he'd bought himself some time. For the next 40 miles, Wayne saw no sign of pursuit. The highway was empty except for normal traffic. A few cars, an occasional truck, nothing suspicious. He began to think he'd overreacted. Maybe the tracker was just insurance fraud or corporate espionage. Something less deadly than the hijacking operation he'd imagined. Then he saw the roadblock. It was set up about 5 miles east of Rawlins, right where the highway curved around a low hill. 2 police cars with flashing lights positioned to funnel traffic into a single lane. A temporary inspection checkpoint, according to the signs. Wayne slowed his truck and joined the line of vehicles waiting to pass through. But something about the setup bothered him. The police cars were too clean, too new. The officers wore sunglasses despite the overcast sky, and their uniforms looked freshly pressed. Not like real cops working a highway checkpoint. As Wayne got closer, he could see that the inspection was cursory. Officers were waving most vehicles through after a quick glance at driver's licenses. But the trucks were being directed to a secondary inspection area behind a concrete barrier. Wayne watched as the truck ahead of him, a blue Freightliner hauling auto parts, was directed into the secondary area. 3 men in civilian clothes immediately surrounded the rig, while the driver was escorted to a small trailer that served as a temporary office. This wasn't a police checkpoint. This was a hijacking operation disguised as law enforcement. Wayne had to make a decision. If he tried to turn around, he'd be caught in the open with nowhere to run. If he went through the checkpoint, he'd be walking into a trap. But there might be a third option. About a mile back, Wayne had noticed a dirt road leading off into the hills. It looked like a ranch access road, the kind used by local farmers and ranchers. If he could reach it without being seen, he might be able to circle around the roadblock and continue west on back roads. Wayne put his truck in reverse and began backing down the shoulder, hoping the curve of the hill would hide him from the checkpoint. The maneuver was risky, backing an 18-wheeler down a highway shoulder in traffic. But he didn't have a choice. He made it to the dirt road just as he saw vehicles moving from the checkpoint. 2 SUVs with tinted windows heading in his direction at high speed. They'd spotted him. Wayne turned onto the dirt road and floored the accelerator, pushing his truck as hard as he dared on the rough terrain. The road was barely wide enough for his rig, with deep ruts and scattered rocks that threatened to damage his tires. Behind him, the SUVs had reached the dirt road and were giving chase. They were faster on the rough terrain, built for off-road pursuit. Wayne's truck was designed for highways, not ranch roads. The dirt road climbed into the hills, winding through scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. Wayne could see a farmhouse in the distance, but no signs of life. No help. That's when the shooting started. Wayne heard the first shots impact his trailer, sharp metallic pings that meant someone was firing at him with high-powered rifles. Not trying to kill him, just disable his truck. They wanted the cargo intact. A bullet shattered his passenger side mirror. Another punched through the back window of his cab, sending glass fragments flying. Wayne ducked as low as he could while still maintaining control of the truck. The dirt road curved around a hill and suddenly dropped into a narrow valley. Wayne could see buildings ahead, an old ranch complex that looked abandoned, barns, outbuildings, and what appeared to be a large equipment shed. Wayne made a desperate decision. Instead of continuing on the road, he drove straight toward the largest barn, hoping the building would provide cover from his pursuers. He crashed through the barn doors at 30 miles per hour, sending splinters and debris flying. Inside, Wayne slammed on the brakes and brought his truck to a stop among rusted farm equipment and scattered hay bales. The barn was bigger than it had looked from outside, with a high roof supported by massive wooden beams. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the walls, creating a pattern of light and shadow that might help conceal his truck. Wayne grabbed a tire iron from his toolbox and climbed down from the cab. Outside, he could hear vehicles approaching, engines, shouting voices, the sound of boots on gravel. "We know you're in there," a voice called from outside the barn. "Come out with your hands up and nobody gets hurt." Wayne didn't believe that for a second. These people had killed 3 drivers already. They weren't going to let him walk away as a witness. He moved to the back of the barn, looking for another exit. There was a small door that led to a corral area, but beyond that was open ground. No cover, no place to hide. The barn doors creaked as they were pushed open. Wayne could see flashlight beams cutting through the dusty air, searching for him among the farm equipment. "There's the truck," someone said. "Check if he's still in the cab." Wayne crouched behind a rusted cultivator, gripping the tire iron. 3 men were moving through the barn, dressed in military-style gear and carrying automatic weapons. Professional operators, not random highway criminals. One of them approached Wayne's truck and peered through the driver's window. "Empty," he called to the others. "Find him. Check everywhere." Wayne knew he couldn't hide forever. The barn was big, but not that big. Eventually, they'd search every corner and find him. His only chance was to create a distraction and slip out during the confusion. Near the back wall, Wayne spotted an old tractor with a full fuel tank. If he could create an explosion, it might give him the cover he needed to escape. Wayne worked his way toward the tractor, staying low behind the farm equipment. The searchers were methodical, checking every possible hiding place. They'd reach him in a few minutes. He unscrewed the fuel cap on the tractor and soaked a piece of hay in gasoline. Then he lit it with his cigarette lighter and threw it at the fuel tank. The explosion was bigger than Wayne had expected. The tractor fuel tank erupted in a ball of flame that instantly set fire to the hay and wooden equipment around it. Within seconds, the entire back section of the barn was ablaze. In the chaos that followed, Wayne made his break. He ran for the small door, burst through it, and sprinted toward the hills behind the ranch. Behind him, the barn was becoming an inferno, with flames reaching toward the wooden roof beams. Wayne ran until his lungs burned, following a dry creek bed that provided some concealment from the burning barn. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, he could see smoke rising from the valley behind him. His truck was gone, along with the $2 million cargo, but he was alive, which was more than could be said for Tommy, Dale, and Curtis. Wayne hiked for 6 hours through the Wyoming wilderness before reaching a county road. A rancher picked him up and drove him to the sheriff's office in Rawlins, where Wayne told his story to a skeptical deputy. "Let me get this straight," the deputy said. "You're claiming there's an organized hijacking ring operating fake police checkpoints on Interstate 80? I'm telling you what happened. They've killed 3 drivers already." "We'll look into it," the deputy said, but his tone suggested he thought Wayne was either lying or delusional. Wayne spent the night in a motel and called Maria the next morning. "Thank God you're alive," she said. "We lost contact with you yesterday afternoon." "What happened?" Wayne told her everything. The GPS tracker, the fake checkpoint, the chase through the hills, the burning barn. "Wayne, I'm sorry, but the insurance company is refusing to pay out. They're calling it driver negligence. They're saying you deliberately destroyed the cargo to avoid delivering it." "That's insane. I saved my own life." "I know. But without proof of the hijacking ring, it's your word against their investigators." Wayne's career was over. The insurance company blacklisted him, making it impossible to find work with any reputable trucking company. The story he told was too fantastic for most people to believe. Fake police checkpoints, professional hijackers, military-grade tracking equipment. But Wayne knew the truth. Somewhere in Wyoming, a criminal organization was running a sophisticated cargo theft operation, using law enforcement disguises and professional equipment to steal millions of dollars worth of electronic shipments, and they were killing anyone who got in their way. 3 months later, Wayne read a news story that vindicated him. FBI agents had arrested 7 members of a cargo theft ring operating across 4 western states. The group had stolen more than $50 million worth of electronics, pharmaceuticals, and other high-value goods over a 3-year period. The operation was run by a former military officer named Colonel Frank Morrison, who had recruited a team of ex-soldiers and corrupt law enforcement officers. They used fake police checkpoints, GPS tracking, and professional equipment to identify and steal high-value shipments. The investigation revealed that the group had killed at least 6 truck drivers who had discovered their operation or refused to cooperate. Tommy Kowalski, Dale Martinez, and Curtis Thompson were among the confirmed victims. Colonel Morrison was found dead in his jail cell before trial, apparently having committed suicide with a hidden cyanide capsule. Several members of his organization received life sentences, but authorities believed other cells were still operating in different parts of the country. Wayne received a settlement from the FBI's Victim Compensation Fund, but it wasn't enough to restart his trucking career. He now works as a security consultant for shipping companies, helping them identify and avoid cargo theft operations. The AA-80 corridor through Wyoming is still considered a high-risk area for valuable shipments. Professional drivers know to avoid stopping at isolated locations and to report any suspicious activity immediately. But Wayne knows the real lesson of his experience. The highway can be a hunting ground for sophisticated predators who use official authority and military tactics to steal from honest truckers. And when you stumble into their operation, your only choices are to run or die. Wayne chose to run and lived to tell the story. But he'll never forget the burning barn, the professional killers, and the moment he realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing on the highway isn't the weather or the terrain. Sometimes it's the people who are supposed to protect you. The fake checkpoint on Interstate 80 was shut down after the FBI raids, but Wayne knows that somewhere else, on some other highway, another Colonel Morrison is setting up another operation. Another group of professional thieves is using badges and uniforms to steal from truckers who are just trying to make an honest living. And the next driver who discovers them might not be lucky enough to escape. Because in the cargo theft business, there are no witnesses, only victims and survivors. And the difference between the two often comes down to split-second decisions made on dark highways in the middle of nowhere. Wayne made the right decision. He survived to expose the truth about one of the most sophisticated criminal organizations ever to target America's trucking industry. But he paid a price for that survival. His career, his livelihood, and his faith in the system that's supposed to protect honest drivers from the predators who hunt them on the lonely roads of America. The sleeper route through Wyoming is quiet now, patrolled by real law enforcement and monitored by legitimate security systems. But Wayne knows that the criminals have just moved to other highways, other states, other routes where valuable cargo travels through isolated country. And somewhere out there, another truck driver is approaching another fake checkpoint, about to face the same choice Wayne faced: cooperate with professional killers or fight for survival against impossible odds. Wayne hopes the next driver is as lucky as he was. But luck isn't something you can count on when you're hauling $2 million worth of cargo through the loneliest highways in America. Sometimes survival comes down to being smarter, faster, and more desperate than the people who want to kill you. Wayne learned that lesson in a burning barn in Wyoming, surrounded by professional killers who treated cargo theft like a military operation. He survived. But others weren't so fortunate. And their ghosts haunt every mile of highway where truckers carry valuable cargo through dangerous country, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, predators are watching and waiting for the next opportunity to strike. The sleeper route earned its name because it looks peaceful and safe. But Wayne knows the truth about that stretch of highway. It's where drivers go to sleep forever. Dutch Callahan thought he'd seen everything in 26 years of long-haul trucking. Roadside murders, drug deals gone wrong, human trafficking operations running out of seemingly legitimate businesses. But what he witnessed at the Desert Rose truck stop changed his understanding of how dark the highway could really get. Dutch was running electronics from Phoenix to Albuquerque when he pulled into the desert. Rose around 11:30 p.m. on a cold December night. It was one of those sprawling truck stops that had grown organically over the decades. Fuel islands, a diner, a convenience store, shower facilities, and a maintenance garage, all connected by cracked asphalt and flickering neon signs. The place had a reputation. Not a good one. Drivers talked about it in truck stop parking lots and CB conversations. Always in lowered voices. Always with the understanding that some things were better left unspoken. The Desert Rose attracted a rough crowd. Independent operators who didn't ask questions about their cargo, company drivers who'd been blacklisted from better routes, and people who weren't drivers at all but found the truck stop useful for other purposes. Dutch usually avoided the place, but he was running behind schedule and needed fuel. His plan was simple: fill the tanks, grab some coffee, and get back on the road as quickly as possible. The fuel islands were busy despite the late hour. Maybe a dozen trucks were taking on diesel, their drivers going through the routine motions of long-haul life. Dutch pulled up to an open pump and began the familiar process of fueling his rig. That's when he noticed the women. They were scattered around the parking lot, some standing near the building, others approaching drivers at the fuel pumps. Even in the dim lighting, Dutch could see they were young. Early 20s at most, some possibly younger. They wore minimal clothing despite the cold night air, and moved with the careful, practiced gestures of people working. Prostitution around truck stops wasn't unusual. Dutch had seen it at dozens of locations over the years, but something about the situation at the Desert Rose felt different. More organized, more controlled. A woman approached Dutch while he was waiting for his tanks to fill. She was blonde, maybe 19, with the kind of hollow-eyed look that came from too many drugs and too little hope. "Looking for company tonight, honey?" she asked, her voice professionally seductive but with an undertone of exhaustion. "No thanks," Dutch replied. "Just getting fuel and moving on." The woman nodded and started to walk away, but something made Dutch call after her. "Hey, you okay? You look like you could use some help." She turned back, and for a moment her professional mask slipped. Dutch saw genuine fear in her eyes, quickly replaced by wariness. "I'm fine," she said. "Just working. You don't have to work like this. There are places that can help you." The woman glanced around nervously, as if checking to see who might be watching. "You don't understand. This isn't... I can't just leave." Before Dutch could ask what she meant, a man appeared beside her. He was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of casual authority that suggested he was used to being obeyed. "Jenny's busy tonight," the man said to Dutch. His voice was polite but carried an underlying threat. "Maybe you should finish your business and move along." Dutch looked at the man more closely. Mid-30s, expensive clothes, gold jewelry. Not the typical truck stop crowd. This guy had money and connections. "Just having a conversation," Dutch said. "Conversation time's over." The man put his hand on Jenny's shoulder, and Dutch could see her flinch. "Come on, Jenny, we've got customers waiting." As they walked away, Jenny looked back at Dutch with an expression that clearly said, "Help me." But by the time Dutch had finished fueling his truck, she had disappeared into the maze of vehicles and shadows. Dutch went into the truck stop's diner, hoping to get a better sense of what was happening at the Desert Rose. The place was about half full, mostly drivers grabbing late dinners, a few locals who looked like they'd been drinking, and several women who were obviously working the crowd. Dutch took a seat at the counter and ordered coffee from a tired-looking waitress named Dolores. She was in her 50s with graying hair and the kind of resignation that came from working too many late shifts. "Busy night," Dutch commented. Dolores glanced around the diner, then leaned closer. "You're new here?" "Just passing through. Don't plan to make a habit of it." "Good. This place..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This place has problems. The kind of problems that follow you down the road if you're not careful." "What kind of problems?" Dolores looked around again, making sure no one was listening. "Girls go missing. Drivers who ask too many questions have accidents. And the management doesn't like people who don't mind their own business." Before Dutch could ask for more details, a man entered the diner. He was in his 40s, wearing a sheriff's uniform, but something about him suggested he wasn't there in any official capacity. He nodded to several of the women, who immediately became more animated and friendly. "That's Deputy Morrison," Dolores whispered. "He provides security for the operation." "What operation?" "The one you don't want to know about." Deputy Morrison approached the counter and sat down 2 stools away from Dutch. He ordered coffee and a piece of pie, then turned to study Dutch with professional interest. "Don't recognize you," Morrison said. "You local?" "Passing through, Phoenix to Albuquerque. Long drive, dangerous to push too hard at night, easy to have accidents on these mountain roads." The threat was politely delivered but unmistakable. Dutch nodded and finished his coffee. As he was paying his check, Dutch overheard a conversation between Morrison and one of the women. They were discussing someone named Ashley who had been causing problems and needed to be relocated. "Clients getting impatient," the woman was saying. Wants delivery by tomorrow night. Tell him Ashley's ready for transport, Morrison replied. But the price goes up if he wants rush service. Dutch realized they were talking about human trafficking. The Desert Rose wasn't just a truck stop with a prostitution problem. It was a distribution center for a sex trafficking operation. Outside, Dutch walked around the parking lot, trying to get a better understanding of the operation's scope. What he saw was disturbing. There were at least 20 women working the lot, all of them young, all of them showing signs of drug use and physical abuse. But more disturbing were the customers. These weren't just lonely truckers looking for company. Many of the men appeared to be affluent locals, businessmen, professionals, people who could afford premium services. And some were clearly there for purposes other than immediate gratification. Dutch watched as money changed hands, deals were negotiated, and women were led away from the truck stop in expensive cars. It was a sophisticated operation serving high-end clients who could pay premium prices for young victims. Near the back of the parking lot, Dutch discovered something that made his blood run cold. There were several RVs and travel trailers that appeared to be serving as living quarters for the women. But these weren't accommodations, they were prisons. Through partially open windows, Dutch could see women inside the trailers. Some appeared to be drugged, lying motionless on beds or couches. Others were clearly being held against their will, with restraints visible on their wrists and ankles. One trailer had a woman pressing her face against a small window, clearly trying to attract attention. She was mouthing the word "help" over and over. Dutch pulled out his cell phone and started taking pictures, but the camera flash attracted attention. Within seconds, 2 men were walking toward him. Large, muscular types who looked like professional enforcers. "You lost, friend?" one of them asked. "Just looking for a bathroom," Dutch replied. "Bathrooms are in the main building. This area's restricted." Dutch nodded and walked away, but he'd seen enough to understand the scope of the operation. The Desert Rose was running a full-service sex trafficking business, complete with holding facilities, security personnel, and official protection. He drove to a rest area about 50 miles down the highway and called the FBI field office in Phoenix. After being transferred several times, he reached an agent named Sarah Martinez who specialized in human trafficking cases. "What you're describing sounds like a significant operation," Agent Martinez said after Dutch described what he'd witnessed. "But we'll need more than eyewitness testimony to build a case. These organizations usually have extensive corruption networks that include local law enforcement. I saw a deputy sheriff who was obviously working with them. That's not unusual. Human trafficking operations require official protection to operate openly. We'll need documented evidence. Photographs, video, financial records." Agent Martinez arranged for Dutch to carry concealed surveillance equipment on his next trip through Arizona. If he could document the trafficking operation, it would provide the evidence needed to bring down the network. 2 weeks later, Dutch was back at the Desert Rose, this time carrying FBI recording devices and cameras. His truck was equipped with hidden surveillance gear that could document activities throughout the parking lot. The operation was running at full capacity. Dutch counted more than 30 women working the lot, with a constant stream of customers arriving and departing. The surveillance equipment captured license plates, faces, and conversations that clearly documented the trafficking operation. But Dutch also discovered something more disturbing. Some of the women weren't just being prostituted, they were being prepared for sale to buyers in other states. Dutch recorded conversations about fresh inventory being shipped to Los Angeles, Houston, and Chicago. The Desert Rose was a regional hub for a nationwide trafficking network. Into a van and driven away. He never saw her again. The following night, Dutch overheard a conversation between Deputy Morrison and the operation's apparent leader, a man everyone called the Colonel. They were discussing a problem with federal surveillance. "Someone's been asking questions," the Colonel said. "FBI agents have been making inquiries about missing women." "Local problem or federal?" Morrison asked. "Could be both. We may need to shut down for a while, relocate the inventory." Dutch realized they were planning to move the operation before law enforcement could act. He contacted Agent Martinez immediately. "We need to move now," he told her. "They're planning to relocate everything. If we wait, these women will disappear into the trafficking network." Agent Martinez coordinated with multiple federal agencies to plan a simultaneous raid on the Desert Rose and several related facilities across the Southwest. The operation would require precise timing to prevent the traffickers from destroying evidence or harming their victims. The raid took place at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. FBI agents, DEA personnel, and U.S. Marshals surrounded the truck stop while Dutch provided real-time intelligence about the location of victims and traffickers. The operation was a complete success. 43 women were rescued from the Desert Rose facility, many of them underage victims who had been reported missing from cities across the country. 17 traffickers were arrested, including Deputy Morrison and the Colonel. The investigation revealed that the Desert Rose was part of a trafficking network that extended across 6 states. The operation had been moving more than 200 women per year, generating millions of dollars in revenue for organized crime groups. The women rescued from the facility received medical treatment, psychological counseling, and assistance returning to their families. Many of them had been drugged and abused for months or years, and recovery would be a long process. Dutch received commendation from the FBI for his role in exposing the trafficking operation. But he also received death threats from associates of the disbanded network who blamed him for its destruction. 6 months after the raid, Dutch was driving through New Mexico when his truck was forced off the road by unknown attackers. He survived the crash but was left with permanent injuries that ended his trucking career. The official investigation concluded that the crash was caused by mechanical failure, but Dutch knew better. The trafficking network had long reach and longer memories. They had sent a message that cooperation with law enforcement came with a price. Dutch now works as a victim's advocate, helping survivors of trafficking rebuild their lives. He also speaks to truckers about recognizing signs of human trafficking and reporting suspicious activities to authorities. The Desert Rose truck stop was permanently closed after the raid. The building sits empty now, surrounded by chain-link fence and weeds. Local authorities have discussed demolishing it, but bureaucratic delays have left it standing as a reminder of the horrors that once took place there. Dutch still drives sometimes, but only during daylight hours and only on routes he knows well. He's learned that the highway can be a hunting ground for predators who exploit the isolation and anonymity of truck stop culture. And he's learned that some of those predators wear badges, carry official authority, and operate with the protection of corrupt officials who profit from human misery. The women he helped rescue have mostly disappeared back into normal lives, trying to forget their experiences at the Desert Rose. But Dutch remembers all of them, their faces, their stories, their courage in surviving horrors that most people couldn't imagine. He keeps their photographs on his desk, a reminder that truckers see everything on America's highways. The good, the bad, and the unspeakable. And sometimes, when you see something unspeakable, you have to decide whether to keep driving or stop and fight. Dutch stopped and fought. And while he paid a price for that decision, he also saved lives. Dozens of young women who were being consumed by a system that treated them as merchandise are now free, because one trucker decided that some things were worth the risk. The night shift at the Desert Rose is over. But somewhere else, on some other highway, another truck stop is running another operation. Another group of predators is exploiting another group of victims. And hopefully, another trucker is watching, recording and preparing to risk everything to shut them down. Because that's what the job requires sometimes. Not just moving freight from point A to point B, but bearing witness to the darkness that hides along America's highways, and when necessary, carrying that witness to authorities who can act on it. The road sees everything, and sometimes the road fights back.